Hey everybody, it's David J. Murphy here with Around the Lens. I'm happy to have a set of filmmakers who are associated with the film Possibilities, which is a documentary about what it's like to be blind in the United States. I'm here joined by the director of the film, Bill Sarine, and one of the producers of the film, the Assistant Vice President of Communications at the American Foundation for the Blind, Mr. Tony Stevens. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Can you please tell us what the story of Possibilities is and how it came to be?
Sure. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Possibilities is, an intimate look at life as a blind or visually impaired person right now, with some of the joys, the challenges, the opportunities, the obstacles, everything that kind of goes with that. And It came to be, American Foundation for the Blind drove this right from the start. They're a nonprofit organization. I don't think movie making is in their uh, to-do list really, but I think they took the bold step of saying like, "Hey, we have a really important message to get out there. We want people to we want to break down stereotypes. We want to get more information out there about the reality of lived experience. And what's the best way to do that? Like, how do we meet people where they are? And with so much media being consumed right now, I think a film is a really smart way to do that. Of course, I think that because I'm a filmmaker, but I think AFB, taking that step forward was really terrific, and we had that opportunity. They also have just such a rich history with Helen Keller and so many materials and archival images and things like that. So we sort of used Helen as a grounding uh, force throughout the film to kind of connect like her legacy and current lived experience together.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I love the focus on Helen Keller, and I think the documentary is a good point of saying this at the very beginning, is that for the most part, we as Americans, I think, don't really understand or know the Helen Keller story beyond maybe the movie that was produced about her life, which primarily just documented her life as a child. And this documentary did a great job of illuminating how much of a advocate she was for the rights of disabled Americans, but also as a person who went around the world and was basically a representative of America.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at like what kids learn in school about the disability community, I mean, Helen's usually the one person they're first introduced to that has a disability.
Right.
And, particularly deaf blindness, she's oftentimes, unless you've maybe have a grandparent who's lost their sight, or someone personally, or maybe someone in your family has diabetes and lost their sight, which is like the leading cause of blindness today for adults. So it's like you probably haven't interacted with somebody. Maybe you've seen someone with a cane on the street or a guide dog.
Hmm.
But yeah, so Helen's kind of that. She's like the monolith, right? Like the big thing that everybody knows about. So,
Sure.
but then I mean, she worked at AFB for 44 years. She came on our staff in 1924 up until when she died in 68. And I mean,
Right.
she was just a regular person that had the regular struggles and dealt with everything along with her assistant Ann Sullivan, who was her teacher, and then Polly Thompson later after Ann passed away. That she was just like everybody else. As giant as people put her on, like a Mount Rushmore of disability advocates. We wanted to bring authentic voices that sort of weren't shadowed by Helen, but definitely impacted by Helen. And I think that's the whole point of like, what is blindness like today, and using Helen as that juxtaposition of like, here's where we've come from and where are we now today.
I'd like to talk a little bit with you, Bill, about what it's like to direct a film that's about the blind person's story, and how you sort of encompassed and also kind of reflected that journey, obviously not being blind yourself. And I know documentarians don't have to be associated with the content they're covering, have that direct relation. But I do wonder, like, did you have to do anything specific to get yourself to cover this story, being obviously that you're not blind? Or was it just simply like you had people like Tony and other folks with the organization who helped kind of guide your direction as you sort of spearheaded this project?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we had several, folks who are blind or visually impaired involved with the making of the film. We had a lot of folks involved. In addition to Tony, we have a couple other producers on the film who are blind. our entire audio description team, our composer, his entire team. We had a lot of folks, that represent the community, and I think that's important too, just from a kind of walk the walk standpoint in terms of employing folks, and giving job opportunities. But in addition to that, for me, I think, as much as this was a really fun opportunity to make a meaningful film, it was also a learning opportunity for me as well. I think I kind of went through, I hope, what some of the processes that people go through watching the film, in terms of, the more folks I met and the more folks I interacted with, the more it, canceled rumors that were in my head, and dispelled rumors and things like that. Just uh, you know breaks down barriers to communication. I think I said early on in the process, I was talking with one of the producers, and I said, hey, I'm probably going to say and do the wrong thing at some point. I want you to correct me, and then I'm going to keep saying and doing stuff. Like, hopefully I don't repeat the same mistake twice. But if we can't have open communication, then this is never going to get done. So we're just going to have to be real with each other, and move forward. And I got to say, like, I not a hiccup in that standpoint. I mean, the folks at AFB were amazing to work with. All the participants in this film, and probably the one thing that got me the most was the amount of vulnerability and the amount of truth and honesty that were shared during this thing. I mean, this film's an hour and 40 minutes. We shot over 90 hours of footage.
Oh my God.
So you
Kudos
can
to your kudos to your editor.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's my brother, actually. But it's heartbreaking, some of the stuff that isn't in the movie to me. But just an incredible amount of just honesty and truth, and shared experience and life experience that was brought to this, by the participants in the film. That's honestly humbling and overwhelming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can you talk a little about your experience personally in filmmaking and what led you to this project? Did you pitch this project to the American Foundation for the Blind? Did they come to you? How did that kind of process go?
Sure. I was a studio executive at Disney for a long time, and I've worked on a lot of big films. And then I left many years ago to go be an independent filmmaker and started making my own things. And I my personal philosophy is I want good projects with good people. Like, that's where it ends for me. I like telling all different types of stories, both narrative and scripted, and also documentary. But this particular one, I had a close friend of mine who is a voice actor, and also produces and does audio description. But he had been doing voice acting for a very long time. And when he first told me about audio description, I didn't really know what that was. I just thought, like, oh, okay, it's like voiceover. And as that conversation evolved, I started to understand what it was. But at the same time, as a filmmaker, I didn't really like the way audio description was done, because it's an afterthought. They kind of do that. They back into time code, whatever the film's done, and it's. I said, with subtitles, it's sort of a one for one, right, or captioning. It's just, whatever they say, that's the words that are coming up on the screen. With audio description, it's a very subjective choice, because as a filmmaker, if I said person walks into a room, there's 100 ways I could shoot that. And the idea that there was somebody on the back end reinterpreting what the work you were doing, and putting it in their own words, I didn't really like that process. So he and I just kind of started having this conversation. And at that very same time, he was connected with a lot of folks at AFB, and AFB was kind of walking down this process of, like, hey, we're thinking of making a film. And so I went and pitched them sort of my version of how I would put this together. And the stars kind of aligned there, and they said, okay, this sounds cool, and you seem like somebody we could potentially work with. And we kind of got going on it. So it evolved from a very strange place. And then, speaking of audio description, that was a really, interesting part of this film. I mean, this is the first film that I'm aware of with open audio description, which means everybody, blind and sighted, is getting the same experience at the same
Mm.
time. There's no separate track. And that was very deliberate. And when I said, like, hey, we should do that, I thought, like, hey, if AFB is not going to try this, who would? Right. And that sounded like a great idea. And then it turned out to be like this major undertaking that we that I don't even think we knew what we were biting off when we did it. Because you have to make room. So it's like the audio description team and the production team were kind of working hand in hand, because instead of backing into time code like most films do, we're specifically saying like this is where we feel like we can fit audio description in a good way, so that we're getting a good description and we have the right time. And how does that work with score, and how does that work with sound design, and how does that all like coalesce together? Um, it was a that was an interesting experiment.
Right, because you were building it from the ground up. You were being
Yeah,
deliberate in how you were integrating it as opposed to an afterthought.
right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the audio description piece of it was probably the most enlightening to me because I've never watched a film with audio description before. I mean, I've probably, I know of it, right? I've seen clips and stuff, and I know what it described in other projects, but to actually watch a product from beginning to end was an interesting experience. And honestly, something I might do just on other films that have it, because it is kind of gives you that extra layer of context with regard to what you're seeing on screen, which is kind of neat. My question is with regard to the objectivity of the narrator or of the the audio description person. And I know it's explored in the film, which I'm glad it is, because I had a question when I saw one scene that had an interesting description of a woman walking, along the street, and the audio description is like, the woman is cute or something,
Yeah,
walks along in a cute style. And I'm like, that's somewhat objective, and it's interesting because it's a documentary. It's not a narrative fiction where you can describe whatever you want. Like, someone had to make the choice to be like, she looks cute, and I want that written in the audio description. I want someone to know that. And then, of course, in the film itself, it talks about that objectivity and how there needs to be a degree of it, because otherwise it would be very bland and boring. And someone, like they were saying, you can't say someone smiles, you say someone raises the sides of their mouth, right?
yeah.
And so you have to have a degree of, like, I don't know,
So
common sense, if you will. So talk to me about that kind of process and how you sort of integrated objectivity, but also put in your own sort of specific narrative in there.
I'm gonna say one thing, and then I want to hear Tony's opinion on this, which I don't even know if he and I have ever discussed this topic, to be honest with you. Um, I for me, all filmmaking is subjective, and so you're always getting the film through the lens of one particular filmmaker. Like that to me is filmmaking. You know, if you and I got handed the same script and we had to go make the same movie, it would absolutely not be the same movie. It would just be two different films. And so for me, that's I think subjectivity is completely acceptable, because that's the version of the story we're telling. You know, and the idea being not being enforcing, I guess, what I want you to see or what I want you to experience, but really, um, you know, creating the feelings and the emotions and all that I'm going for, like that the story's going for. And I think that's part of the filmmaking experience. So I'm like I kind of lean towards subjectivity. And I had a lot of back and forth with the audio description team over this thing, a lot. In terms of like choosing words and parsing words and what does this mean and what does that mean, and why are we saying this instead of that. I mean, a lot of back and forth, which they is not normally part of the process. Like audio description teams don't interact with directors. That's not even a normal thing at all. So it was just an interesting thing for them and for me. But Tony, I'm curious, like where do you fall on that subjectivity
No,
versus
yeah, because
objectivity line?
well, I mean, the reality is that with audio description, even objectivity is what we thrive for. We don't want people injecting certain things into the descriptions, right?
Hmm.
But even that's subjective to some sense, because you can have two describers that are going to describe the movies differently as well. And there might be things that are critical to know that you were missed, or they might overdo it sometimes. So I think even in that sense, I mean, one of the great things about the film, by bringing in the audio description team early on, and it was Roy Samuelson who led that team. It was, who Bill referenced earlier as that, friend that put him in touch, because we've worked with Roy for years because he's one of the top in the business. In fact, the first thing you hear in the film is a tone called Kevin's tone, and that was something Roy created, which is an audible version of like when you have a little closed caption symbol appear, or almost like a sign of approval that yeah, this film meets certain criteria of audio described quality that is going to be positive for the listener, right? But in a sense, his team, they kind of break the fourth wall. And irony is one of those things that is visually seen all the time, but seldom is it described, because to describe it would be a bit subjective, that you have to sort of break away. And in some sense, there's another scene too when Satana introduces herself. So Satana Howery, who's the describer, anybody on like Netflix can go hear her voice now describing Seinfeld. Like, she's one of the best in the biz
Wow.
and has done a ton of description, and she's top notch, world class. And there's a point in the film when she even breaks the fourth wall and say, "And this is me," like describing right now as we speak.
Yeah, I love that.
And so, but with the situation with Conchita, who's the one that says, and she's telling this story about, and it's a real story within the blindness that people that are blind get, that you don't want to be seen with your cane because you're sort of seen differently, right? And so that was an important message that Conchita was telling in her story of moving psychologically through her vision loss and identifying herself as someone who's blind. And then it cuts to the scene that Bill had, which visually is a great sense of irony. There she is walking, was in front of the Capitol, Bill, I think, or somewhere.
Yeah, it's out in DC.
Like, yeah. And she's walking with a white cane, and she's smiling. Like, and so I think the description of the word cute, yeah, that's a subjective word, you could say, because it goes, Conchita is like walking with a white cane, looking cute, but it juxtaposes just that second before when she was like, and I'm not going to walk around with one of these white sticks, this cane. And so I think it really sets up from the blindness perspective. It's one of the points with the audience in the film screenings we had during our festival run and stuff. It really resonated, right? And it shows us, I think, to some sense, that audio describers, as much as we want to be objective, we don't need to be sterile, and you don't need to be, you can be creative with this approach, because ultimately it is subjective. Even though we thrive for objectivity, every describer is going to describe something differently. In the Olympics, you might, be described the thing that gets you across the goal line, or they might be describing a foul taking place at the exact same time that can have a whole nother impact in the game. Like, there's all this stuff happening that describers make subjective choices on. So,
Yeah, by the way, when that came up, that particular Conchita thing, that's Roy actually pitching me a joke. He's like, I'd like to get the first audio description joke in, because that's like the furthest thing from objectivity, right? He's like, the audio describer telling you a joke in the middle of audio description, because her line, actually, she said, I'm cute and I don't want to be walking around with a cane. And then the audio describer says, Conchita looking cute, walking around with a cane.
But visually you see that, and the audience sighted
Yeah.
sees that. So immediately a sighted, if they didn't describe anything there, I'd be sitting next to my sighted friend that might go, and I'm like, hey, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Earlier, Bill, you mentioned that this film is comprised of like 90 hours of collected footage, which is just an amazing amount of footage. But obviously, whenever you're doing documentary, you're going to have tons of footage you don't use. But talk to me a little bit about the production process, in so much as how many years it took. I'm always like to geek out on the types of cameras you used, especially when it comes to things like interviews. I'm always curious how documentarians decide to choose how to interview people. Because obviously in most documentaries, when you interview someone, they're either looking off camera or they're looking into camera. What goes into those specific choices, and especially when you're shooting someone who's blind, because the majority, I believe, of your interview subjects were blind. Like, did you just tell them where to look, and how do you do that when they're blind? And it's just going to go geek with me on these little technical details.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start camera. I mean, documentaries by nature are usually, especially for this kind of thing, shot on lots of different cameras. That's how the reality works. So you start with like the base requirements of like, hey, I want to be able to shoot in 4K, and I want to make sure we can shoot raw or log native, just to start with, just to make sure we have that level of consistency. But I mean, what's beautiful right now about where we are in technology and post and all that is that you can take a Sony camera shooting in 4K and a Red camera shooting in 4K, and I can color match those in post. So the ability to color match and the ability to sync things up later is amazing right now. So I think that's definitely the documentarian's friend, just because you do have that such variety. But it's about establishing a look right up front, and I like I tend to like little pieces, if you will, and I like intimate, uh, you know, I like the awkwardness when somebody's answering a question or when they're thinking. I kind of like being intimate with them, and like either sometimes you're showing their hands and they're fidgeting, and sometimes you're close in on their face when they're. I think that brings in the emotion. But I'm always a two camera guy. Like at least I'm going to say let's have two, and if we can three. If the world allows for it. Um, so it's just I think once you establish a look, but like this is gonna be our staple. I mean, there's 30 plus people in this film, so that's a lot of people that have us, one film as subjects. So it's about establishing sort of like what's our vibe, what's our look going to be, and then how do we keep that consistent? Because you're going to be working with multiple camera people and multiple crews and multiple locations and multiple cameras and all that. So that was really my drive on that, is to kind of keep that consistency, because the consistent thing was probably going to be me. So how do I translate that into different environments? um yeah, I think as much as I can. I mean, I don't know that I ever considered like directing people in terms of like where they have to look or where they have to position their eye line, if you will. I think I put that more on us, you know what I mean? Like I think it's more, you know and I interviewed Tony. Like Tony's one of our subjects in the thing too, so he
Mhm.
can even speak to that experience directly. But yeah, for me it's more like, let's kind of like, I mean, you're in a chair and you're facing this direction, and then we're gonna find the best workaround for that and find out the best positioning, and kind of that's on me. Like that's my job.
You
To go
you were
figure that.
great because I hate when we do interviews and you guys found me. It wasn't okay. A little more left. Nope, nope, nope. Yeah, okay. You need to look down. You need to, and I'm like, I don't know what down it. It's like
Right.
for a lot of us in the blindness community, it's a little annoying when people are trying to like, no, no, left, 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 up, up. No.
Yeah,
So
and I think that's the other difference. I mean, in working with real, I don't say real people as opposed to actors, but when you're working with a trained actor who does this for a living every day, that's a very different experience from working with a subject who's not used to being on camera. And the last thing I want is a person who's not an actor. I don't want them thinking about that stuff, to be honest with you. Like I really want them in the moment. I want them focused more on the conversation that we're having and the subject matter, and you know giving meaningful answers. If I take them out of it and I'm shouting action and cut and giving direction and things, they're not used to that. That's not their job. And so I'm not a big proponent. I don't even like shouting when I'm working with actors, but especially with non-actors, when you're working with them, everything you can do to take them out of the idea that like, oh my God, I'm surrounded by people and every eye's on me, and this is a high pressure situation. Like everything you can do to remove that barrier and just make this, hey, we're just gonna, we're gonna have a conversation. Like let's get into it. Like let's talk for a bit and keep this, on a nice, calm, even keel, and let's get out what we can, because that's what you want, right? I mean, that's the most natural thing. And a lot of times, like, I mean, I don't know if you notice this, Tony. I don't really say action in these kind of things. Like, I mean, I kind of turn to my guys, hey, you guys feeling good? Everything kind of booming and rolling? Yeah, yeah, we hit the button on the camera. Cool. Just start talking, and then when we're done, we're done, and I go, cool. Why don't we stop there? Like it doesn't need to be a big big filmmaking moment, if you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, especially on like a documentary, it's kind of free form in that way, right? So, I was actually doing a pitch meeting and I had to record myself. I had a director calling action on me. And
Hmm.
that's kind of intimidating, honestly, to
Yeah.
be like, okay, now you have to speak. I'm like, oh my gosh, and forget everything you want to say. So I think, especially in documentary, when you're doing an interview, like, just make it a chill thing, right? It's a
Yeah.
conversation. And you don't want the interviewee to feel kind of intimidated by that. Let's talk a little bit
By the
about.
way, I feel the same thing about makeup. That's
Okay.
another great one. For documentaries in particular, because I'll work with a makeup artist and say, hey, you're doing what I call confidence makeup. It is not about that. Like it's not the glam version. I said, but like you're at a Christmas party and somebody's taking a picture and you already feel weird, right? You'd suck your stomach in and make sure your chin's pointing the right way. Make sure. I said, this is a person who's gonna be on video with like two cameras pointed at them, and like we just want them to feel like we give a shit about them and they're looking their best, like we
Right.
care, so
Yeah, absolutely.
we're gonna do our best to make sure you're presented in the best possible way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just natural makeup, basically,
Yeah.
Get rid of the shine off their forehead, like my shine,
Yeah.
you know, make him look a little bit, presentable on camera. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little about the jobs aspect, because I think that's a big kind of call to action for this film. At least the way I interpret it is the need and I think importance of understanding that just because people are blind doesn't mean they can't work, right? And I think that's a lot of your subjects mention that. And obviously you had, a blind person on this project, your audio description person. Were there any other blind people who worked on this outside of obviously, your producer, who were a part of production? And do you think, or has there ever been an instance where a director of a film was blind? And is that even a possibility? Could that happen?
I'll answer that first one because I directed a documentary short about West Virginians that were blind last year, and so the answer to that is yes, there have been blind directors. But it's a challenge. For me, it was a challenge, in that I want the audience that I know is a sighted audience to be engaged. I don't need to prove the world I can do everything. For us, it was just cost. We didn't have the money for this other documentary short like we did to go out and do the thing with Bill. But there are people like that, that have been, tackled stereotypes and work with people. I remember I did radio, television, film in undergrad at the University of Georgia, and I learned how to pull focus, and I could actually do it better on the Hitachis that we were wheeling around the studio, just by knowing, okay, it's 3 meters away. I got to put it right here at 10 o'clock, right? And the other people were fumbling because they're looking with their eyes and not just the mechanics. So yeah, there's things you can do for sure. Um, but I think too, there's an enormous value in the sighted eye when telling a story to a sighted audience. But yeah, we had a bunch of people in the film that were blind. Bill, I mean, you know, from music, but yeah, Bill can share more about that because he worked with them directly and sourced them, and yeah, it was definitely a sense of inclusion that we loved at AFB. We were excited to see that happen.
Yeah. I mean, it we had, I mean, I don't really know the number, to be honest with you, but I would say over a dozen people working on the film that were blind. And but to the point I guess you were making about blindness and employment as a whole, you know, the blind and visually impaired community is highly unemployed at a rate that is embarrassing, to be honest. I think part of this project is, hey, if we're going to do a project on behalf of AFB, we're going to be, hiring people. Why aren't we looking for qualified people who are talented people and great at their job and are also blind? Like, why aren't we doing that? Like, why should we should certainly lead with that idea, you know? And I think we did that, and we also, we kind of show like how that great marriage can work, between sighted and blind co-workers, creating something great together.
Absolutely. No, that's a great message to leave the viewer with. And as we sort of end this interview, is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
I mean, folks can check the film out, released on Helen's birthday, which we're excited. 146th birthday. It'll be released on, a lot of the big streaming platforms, Amazon Prime and Apple TV and, Tubi, I think for streaming. And then, for people for educational purposes, we want to try to get into classrooms and universities. So we're able to be on Bidlo Plus and Canopy. So we're excited that we're, launching this around our Carnegie Hall, New York premiere screening on Helen's birthday. We're also doing, this broad distribution of it finally getting into people's homes, after doing a successful festival run. So we're just, we hope we can teach people about audio description. We hope we can teach people what it's like to be blind, and just, give a window into our world. So yeah.
Very good. And Bill?
Um, yeah, I think I'll just say, in regards to Helen Keller, it's, Helen cut not only a wide path for people with disabilities as a whole, but I think just for all kinds of marginalized folks. And I would say that her work is not done, and it's on all of us to kind of pick up the charge and move forward and help out folks that need help, and to look for opportunities wherever we can to continually, you know, make us all one group.
Yeah. The title Possibilities comes from a quote from Ellen that's at the beginning of the film. Tomorrow, what possibilities there are in that word. And when we were trying to think what to name it, Bill brought that to us and really just, anchored it. And so, yeah, that's what it says.
Well, that's great. Well, it's a wonderful film with a very important message, and I hope everyone listening goes out and watches it and listens to it, because it works on many different levels. And so, again, thank you so much for taking time to be on the program, Bill and Tony. I really appreciate it. Again, everybody, I'm David J. Murphy. This is Around the Lens, and we'll see you all on the next one. Have a great one, everybody. Bye-bye.